Octopuses and squids are cephalopods, a class of animal that has been garnering a lot of attention over the past few years due to their high intelligence and multitude of other abilities. But possibly their most dazzling talent is their ability to shapeshift. They do this mostly to hide from prey and ward off predators, as you can imagine, but females of some squid species have been even found to deter aggressive males by creating the illusion of male testes. But they don't just whack on camo print and call it a day. Cephalopods have been found to disappear completely, perfectly matching the colour and texture of their surroundings. Pretty wild, I know, but what's even wilder is that cephalopods are colourblind. The receptor cells in their eyes can only detect in black and white. So how do they match colour if they can't see colour? This week we're talking about how exactly cephalopods manipulate light to shapeshift, what we know and the mystery that remains, and how some of these mechanisms have even inspired human designs. Welcome to Brain Noises. I am Chloe, science communicator and recovering physicist, and on this channel we talk about the thoughts, the feelings that pass through my mind, generally relating to science, but I cannot make any promises. So if that's something you think you might enjoy hearing more of, then please subscribe and thank you for watching. First, a very quick housekeeping notice. I have actually got a 100 subscriber celebration special video in the works, but I definitely didn't anticipate reaching almost 300. I think this time last week I was on like 80 or something, so keep your eyes peeled. It's a little bit sillier than a lot of my other videos and quite different, but I thought I'd do something fun to welcome you all to this channel. Thank you for being here. So what does it even mean to be invisible? How can these complex organisms change to look like something entirely different or just disappear into the background? And how can they change into this state at will and in the blink of an eye? Cephalopods have 3 special layers of skin that use a combination of approaches to achieve this invisible shape-shifting effect. Chromatophores that absorb light, iridophores that bend light, and leucophores that scatter light. The first layer manipulates light through absorption. Each cell has a tiny sac that contains pigment. In the case of chromatophores, it's either red, brown, orange, or black. Oh, and yellow. Because these sacs are elastic, they can be stretched or squeezed. And if you can imagine loads of these stretching or squeezing things happening all at once, it overall creates a colour-changing effect. This occurs because when the pigmented molecules are separated from each other, most of the light can pass through them without being refracted or slowed down or having any kind of change in wavelengths, which, if you know light, you know results in a change of colour. At the other extreme, when they clump together inside a cell, their refractive index, the speed at which light can pass through the material, changes. In this state, more light is scattered, making the cell appear white. Scientists have recently genetically engineered human kidney cells to produce the protein responsible for this. By altering the salinity, which is the concentration of ions present of the fluid surrounding the kidney cells, they were able to make the pigmented molecules inside the cells clump together or separate, so just like in the cephalopods. And they're now using this mechanism to try to create artificial materials that can achieve this effect and change their transparency. The layer below chromatophores consists of iridophores, which play a role in reflecting surrounding light, allowing an octopus to even more closely match the shade surrounding it. These iridophore cells are filled with hundreds of structures that are almost like mirrors that reflect the light back up through the octopus's skin, allowing colours to appear brighter if desired. These reflecting structures are also responsible for adding shades of blue. Fun fact, blue doesn't actually exist as a pigment in nature, and the way it comes about is through structural coloration. The final special structure in the skin of an octopus is called a leucophore. This is another type of reflective structure, but it sits below the sort of blue layer above that I've just discussed. Unlike the mirror-like reflectiveness of the layer above, this one is covered in like jagged stalks that reflect light but in a very different way to the one above. Near the surface of the water, this scatters light in a way that makes it appear white, but in deeper waters, it allows for this passive scattering of light that means the octopus ends up reflecting the colours that is around it in its environment. So you can imagine how that helps with camouflage. So this is a fun one to note because it shows that octopuses can passively scatter light. The point of this structure is so that if the octopus is caught off guard, it already has a little bit of camouflage before it's had time to sort of process like what's around it and actively match the environment. Research is ongoing. when is it not? But yeah, they're currently looking into a lot of quite interesting ways to harness this mechanism for camouflage, which I think is the obvious one, but also different types of heat absorption. I read quite recently about a coffee cup that was using this technique, and the idea there was that you could control how quickly the cup loses heat. So you could say, right, I want to drink this coffee in 30 minutes, and you could kind of manipulate the cup it was in so that once 30 minutes had passed, it had lost the exact amount of heat that you wanted it to lose. And that's all inspired by octopus skin. And this is possible because infrared radiation is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, so although the focus of this video is visible light, it shouldn't be forgotten that it's all electromagnetic waves at the end of the day. So you can see how like solutions to do with heat come in. It's not just about the visible stuff. So this is already pretty cool, in my humble opinion. But aside from colour, cephalopods can also change their texture. I feel like before learning about this, when I watched these videos of octopuses changing colour, I just assumed it was a really clever colour change that made them look like they'd changed texture. But in fact, octopuses have these little muscle bundles that allow them to be really, really flexible when it comes to changing the texture of their skin. These muscle bundles are called papillae. I don't know why I said it like that. It's been a long day. It's 11 a.m, but it's been a long day. Muscles in these bundles form a network, with some running radially and others in circles, allowing areas of skin to be quickly smoothed out or raised as needed. You can think of them like goosebumps, except very cool. No offense, goosebumps. I just think it's all incredible because when you read about these mechanisms, not only are they really, really impressive, but they also are so precise and so fast. And that's what really gets me. Is like, it's one thing to be like, okay, it scatters light in this way, but it's another thing to actually watch the videos and see how quickly octopuses can respond to a threat or something that they want to eat. Right, onto the mystery side of the video, onto the meat of it. What do we mean by colourblind? As I mentioned, though some of these cells work passively to camouflage, some of them work actively, which means at some point the octopus's nervous system is detecting something and it's responding in whatever way. How exactly is a creature that is colourblind doing this? That's the million-dollar question, but first, it's important to establish what I mean by colourblind. In the simplest of terms, eyes, whether they be human or not, contain light receptors that enable them to see. There are a few different types of light receptor with different purposes. In humans, there are two types, rods and cones. Cephalopods have eyes containing only one type of light receptor, a receptor that cannot distinguish colour. And this is why we refer to them as colourblind, and this is why when we first discovered them and started looking into how they see stuff, we were like, that's weird, they're colourblind, because we were focusing on the receptors in their eyes. But this is a pretty human-centric way of looking at things. Are receptors in the eyes the only way that something can see? So how do they see? There are two main hypotheses when it comes to how octopuses see while being colourblind. Number one, they also see with their skin, or two, they make use of chromatic aberration. The second appears to be the most prominent, but I'm going to briefly talk about the first. The first hypothesis suggests that they feel colour using chemicals in tiny fibres on their arms. Octopuses can sense colour by the changes in the wavelengths of light reaching these receptors. Cephalopods definitely do possess these photosensitive molecules, so potential does exist for them to be detecting light through their skin. However, the molecules in the skin are like those in the eyes, so it's like quite unclear as to how they then help them see colour. On to the second and most prominent hypothesis. Chromatic aberration is the differential bending of light of different wavelengths. In a kind of simpler terms, it means different wavelengths are bent differently. Did that make it simpler? When I was writing my notes, it made it simpler, but now I've said it out loud. That's how a prism splits white light. Light of shorter wavelengths bends more as it passes through a lens. For most organisms and for most human-made devices, so cameras encounter this, for example, chromatic aberration is meant to be minimized. It causes blurring, it causes rainbows, like that's That's annoying. The chromatic aberration hypothesis proposes that instead of avoiding chromatic aberration, cephalopods enhance it using their weird off-axis pupil shapes. I don't know if you've ever looked into the eyes of an octopus. I haven't in person, but even just photos, they are so weird looking. I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, like no hate octopuses, but they are scary. I'm scared. Ooh, okay, my leg's gone numb. I knew this would happen at some point. Let me just shake that out. So this weird shape allows them to detect colour by monitoring image blurring as focus changes. So the blur that they are receiving is actually very welcome because it allows them to then work out the colour. Ooh, oh, the pins and needles has moved. And computer models have actually shown that this method of colour detection is possible. So this chromatic aberration hypothesis could actually really explain not only how they can see colour, but also why their eyes look so strange. Some octopuses have an elongated split, while in a cuttlefish, which is another type of cephalopod, it's the shape of a W. These two hypotheses actually lead to different results depending on the circumstance. From what I could see, we're still awaiting the results of experiments comparing these two hypotheses and really finding a sort of conclusive answer around it. One really interesting thing that this does is it also just confronts us about the fact that we just view everything in such a human-centric way. We only concluded that they were colourblind because we assumed that they needed these different types of rods to see colour. And it's funny as well because it's like their pupils are so weirdly shaped, and it's just quite interesting that it's only relatively recently that we've been like, maybe that's for a reason. And what happens now if they do establish that the pupil shapes are a reason for this, and even if they don't establish that it's because of the pupil shapes, we're going to have to reassess how we see other animals. And there are actually quite a few animals that we've written off as colourblind, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're just colourblind by our definition and they've been seeing colour all this time. But yeah, research on light detection beyond the brain is still very much ongoing, but I'm excited to see what kind of doors it opens. This video was obviously mostly centered around how they see colour and the mystery around that, but there's a lot of like really cool biomimetic stuff that I've sort of half written videos on. Let me know if you want to see them. So examples of like things inspired by octopuses, bioplastics, robots, self-repairing clothes. There are so many designs that have actually been inspired by how octopuses do things, and as is evident, there's still so much that we don't understand about octopuses, so it's wild to think how much stuff octopuses might end up inspiring us to make. A favourite one recently that I'm going to briefly talk about is a glove with artificial suckers. Was inspired by those found on octopuses, and it allows people to securely grip delicate objects underwater. You can see how this actually could be quite useful to the scientific community and just people spending time underwater. And of course, our fundamental understanding of nerve cells was also inspired by squids. So yeah, there's a lot out there, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.